Talking points. The social contract. These talking points stem from the following claim. Taxation is theft. Taxation is not theft. Taxation is part of the social contract. Various countries in the world, including the United States, have a provision that allows for the collection of taxes from their subjects. Not all taxation is necessarily fair, but that doesn't make taxation itself illegal. This point usually results in any one or more of the following responses. The social contract is invalid because I never agreed to it. This is not true. Your agreement to the social contract is found in your various proofs of citizenship. You either consented to the social contract when you took the oath of citizenship when you were naturalized as a citizen, or for most people, your agreement to the social contract was made by your parents when you were born, and that agreement was renewed when you came of age. The social contract is invalid because my consent was not voluntary. Well, when you were born, nothing is voluntary. For your childhood years, you are not in a position to give informed consent to anything more complicated than what your favourite flavour of ice cream is, and therefore you require representation. In most cases, this is given via your parents, who make important life decisions on your behalf until you come of age. They have the responsibility for your well-being, and as such, they must also have the legal right to make decisions on your behalf. My parents don't have the right to consent to the social contract on my behalf. Again, this is simply not true. Yes, they do, as I previously stated. They have the right to consent to any number of life decisions until you are old enough to make those decisions for yourself. So my parents have the right to consent to a loan that I will be responsible for? No, of course they do not. If your parents take out a loan for any amount of money that they use to support you or to purchase goods and services you make use of, they are legally responsible for the debt. They are the ones who will be responsible for paying that debt back. You don't become responsible for that debt when you reach 18 years old, for example. The responsibility for paying that loan back is theirs because they took out the loan. But my parents didn't consent to the social contract either. Yes, they did. Just like your parents consented to the social contract when they remained in the country and gave birth to you, their parents gave their consent to the social contract by remaining in the country and giving birth to their children. Once your parents were grown up, their continued residence in the country was implied consent to be bound by the social contract. If you go back far enough, you will get to a point where, for example, in the United States, they ratified the Constitution with a majority of vote among the 12 states that existed at the time. If they did not wish to be bound by the social contract, they had the choice to leave and renounce their citizenship. The social contract is invalid without your explicit consent. If you walk into a restaurant and order a meal, you have already given your consent to be bound by the conditions imposed by the restaurant management, that you will reimburse the restaurant for preparing you a meal as well as associated running costs of the restaurant, including any profits they wish to make and providing you with that meal. The response to this talking point might be, no, that's wrong. I had to give my express and written agreement to consent to the restaurant's terms and conditions. Now, the commenter that made this comment had a bizarre idea about what constitutes written consent. Did he receive a written agreement with small print and detailed terms and conditions prior to being able to order his meal and it being prepared for him? Did he have to place his signature on any documentation? On all occasions that I have entered a restaurant and ordered a meal, I have never had to sign any agreement before ordering the meal, and I have never had to sign anything that I paid cash for. The only time I signed was to make a payment by plastic, and that was a signature to authorize a funds transfer to the restaurant business so that they could be paid for the service. On every occasion, my entry to the restaurant and my decision to sit and order food there implied my consent to the terms of service that the restaurant had given. That is implied consent. The social contract is invalid because you cannot renew a contract without explicit consent. Well, that idea would invalidate the concept of automatically renewing car insurance policies, as well as automatically recurring direct debit policies for those of us in the UK. This would automatically invalidate any automatic acceptance wherever any changes to the terms of service are made. That would mean no more changes to contracts with your internet service provider without your express written consent. The situation is that implied consent is often given for a variety of situations, including contract renewal. The social contract is invalid because the government that the social contract is with has no legitimate claim to the territory I live in. Actually, the government of any given territory can show receipts of purchase, records of conquest, and titles bequeathed from other parties to show that it does. The social contract is invalid because you cannot get out of it. It's actually straightforward to withdraw from the social contract. All you need to do is renounce your citizenship and leave the country. But I have to ask permission from the government to leave. No one ever said there wasn't a process to contract termination. In a private contract you can withdraw from it, but you have to contact the company that you have the contract with. In some cases you have to give written instruction to cancel, and you have to place your signature on the contract to do so. The social contract is invalid because there is no alternative to the social contract. This is like arguing that cars are illegitimate as a form of transport because there isn't one that runs on water and can get 300 miles to the gallon. In truth, there are many alternatives. If you don't like the social contract of the country that you are in, you can renounce your citizenship and leave the country, go somewhere that has a social contract that you prefer. Or if you have outstanding criminal warrants against your name, or don't want to enter another territory, or you were simply too stubborn to jump through a few hoops, there is a simple way around it. All you have to do is go to the nearest coast, get on a boat, sail out to sea at about 12 to 14 nautical miles outside the coastline until you are in international waters. As long as you don't enter another territory, that's it. You're done with all social contracts forever. The social contract is invalid because the government does things I don't like. It doesn't stand to reason that the social contract is invalid. There are many things that governments in various countries do on our planet that I don't like. The United States has gotten involved in overseas wars on far too many occasions. The UK has gone to war against Iraq in support of the United States in spite of opposition from people like myself. Does it follow that the social contract as a concept is invalid for that reason? No. The social contract is invalid because the money taken from me in taxes is used to pay for things that I don't want, need, or support. Let's say I'm a landlord and you rent a property from me. You pay me rent 1 month and I spend $500 of that rent on a brand new 50-inch TV set. I didn't spend your rent money on that TV set. As soon as you paid me that money as rent, it became my money to do with as I please. The only thing that rent money is used for is in payment for your part of the lease agreement in order that you can live there. You do not pay money in taxes for things that you don't need or want. Your money in taxes is not paid in return for a war you never wanted to fight. Your money in taxes is not used for a public school education system that you will never use. Your money in taxes isn't even used for things that you do use. Your money in taxes is paid as part of your responsibility to honour the contract that you have with the government in exchange for your continued right to live as a law-abiding citizen of your country. The social contract is invalid because if I want to get out of it, I have to leave. Well, by this reasoning, a rental agreement between you and your landlord is invalid because if you want to get out of it, you have to leave the apartment or house. I shouldn't need to explain why this is nonsense. Commenters who make this statement often follow up with a denial of the legitimacy of the government to own property or territory, which I have covered earlier. The social contract is like a cell phone company that demands that you take service with them because you live on their turf. No, it's not. The cell phone company does not own the land that you occupy, therefore they have no authority to contract in such a manner. By comparison, the government has ownership of the land that it can prove, as I stated previously, through title deeds and so on, the same proofs of ownership that you would accept for private citizens and companies. And the following talking point is actually a conglomerate of multiple talking points that I had to address. The social contract is invalid because you cannot change it. If voting changed anything, it would be illegal. It doesn't matter who you vote for, the government stays in power. Actually, you can change the social contract by voting for people who support your political views. Voting in fact does change things. It changes who's in power, who makes the decisions. It certainly is not illegal. And the argument that it doesn't matter who you vote for because the government stays in power is a ridiculous example of sophistry that ignores the fact that it is not the government or the position that makes policy. It is the person that occupies it. And that is something that your vote can and does change. The social contract is invalid because the territory that the government occupies was taken by conquest. It is often the case that there have been many situations that were once acceptable are no longer acceptable in today's society. The international community in general, and the UN in particular, has declared that the conquest of territory as a means of territorial acquisition is no longer legitimate. Do these people want to retroactively apply this change? Does this mean that the territory that is occupied today must be returned to the conquered? If this were the case, then every single acre of land must be traced back to the original settlers, all the way back to the original tribe that migrated out of sub-Saharan Africa. This is a prohibitively complex task that would require that we trace the ancestry of every person alive today back to the original settlers. Now let's apply this logic to private industry. Cocaine was once legal in the United States and was used in Coca-Cola's products. Now cocaine is a controlled substance. Should we strip Coca-Cola of all of its assets as the proceeds of crime because they used cocaine in their products before it became illegal? No? Then why would you want us to deny the legitimacy of a country its sovereign right to rule over its people just because they obtained the territory they now occupy through conquest prior to conquest being declared illegitimate? I don't care if someone uses drugs. You're assuming the legitimacy of a law in the argument for the legitimacy of a law. Circular reasoning. Wait just a damn minute. Laws are illegitimate? And the only way that we can argue for the legitimacy of laws is assuming that laws are legitimate? Fortunately, this is not the case. Laws are necessary in order to ensure the survival of society. For example, shall we now get rid of laws that prohibit murder, kidnapping, theft and fraud? I already know that these people would like to get rid of laws that control the production of food in order to prevent people from being poisoned by companies taking too many shortcuts, but how about it? I'm not arguing that laws are legitimate by appealing to laws that are in force. In my previous argument, I appealed to the existence of laws prohibiting certain behaviours or substances in order to make the point about trying to retroactively enforce punishments for behaviours conducted prior to those laws coming into effect, and how unreasonable it is to do so. But, if one wishes to argue that laws cannot be legitimate, then the same argument can be made against the prohibition against conquering a neighbouring territory. In the end, these prohibitions are in place in order to protect a society, and the prohibition against invading a neighbouring territory exists as a means of protecting global society, regardless of the fact that there are problems with enforcing said prohibition. Voting is evil because it is complicity in the mob's use of violence. And free market capitalism is evil because it is complicity in the mob's use of criminally obtained funds to buy influence in people's lives. See how we can both use the appeal to emotion there? If you wish to argue that government is like the mob and doesn't have the right to control the territory it owns, and therefore voting is legitimate because it legitimizes the government's mob rule over people, then you have to essentially disavow the right of a government to hold title over the land and territory that it owns, which governments can prove through records, title deeds, and so on, the same proofs of ownership that you would accept for private entities, and if you wish to do that, then it would be a case of extreme hypocrisy to deny government this right while demanding that private ownership retains this right. Once again, voting gives people a choice in who they wish to run the government that governs the society that they live in. It simply comes down to this. Voting is evil because I can't get people to vote the way I want them to. And that's just tough luck. Fucking selfish bastards. In a situation where one political ideology wins out over another, there is always going to be someone who is disappointed, and if you can't convince people your political ideology is good enough for them, then trying to pull the rug out from underneath them by denying them the right to vote for their preferred method of government is just plain cheating and is mean-spirited and self-centered. Voting is evil because it is complicity in the mob's use of violence. And free market capitalism is evil because it is complicity in the mob's use of criminally obtained funds to buy influence in people's lives. See how we can both use the appeal to emotion there? If you wish to argue that government is like the mob and doesn't have the right to control the territory it owns, and therefore voting is illegitimate because it legitimizes the government's mob rule over people, then you have to essentially disavow the right of a government to hold title over the land and territory that it owns, which governments can prove through records, title deeds, and so on, the same proofs of ownership that you would accept for private entities, and if you wish to do that, then it would be a case of extreme hypocrisy to deny government this right while demanding that private ownership retains this right. Once again, Voting gives people a choice in who they wish to run the government that governs the society that they live in. It simply comes down to this. Voting is evil because I can't get people to vote the way I want them to. And that's just tough luck. Fucking selfish bastards. In a situation where one political ideology wins out over another, there is always going to be someone who is disappointed, and if you can't convince people your political ideology is good enough for them, then trying to pull the rug out from underneath them by denying them the right to vote for their preferred method of government is just plain cheating and is mean-spirited and self-centered.